I need feedback from constituents. And before I get into a little background on myself, what I think I'd like to do is make a presentation. And the presentation will be a little bit about why I'm here rather than Brett Miller. So many of you have known Brett for a long time. And also about the biggest decision that we make every year, which is the budget. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the budget. And then I'm going to open it up for questions. And then around 8 o'clock we'll wrap it up. And if you want to ask questions after that, I'll stick around. So again, my name's Steve Mentzer. I was brought up in Lancaster County, but in Manor Township. And I've been with my wife for 41 years. We have 2 children, and I have 4 grandchildren. But I didn't spend my entire life in public service. In fact, the first 25 years of my career was spent in the investment business, and I spent it with Smith Barney, or one of their predecessors. And after 25 years in the investment business, I decided one day that I didn't want to do that anymore. And going in, and we had our one child in college and another in high school, and so she kind of looked at me like, "What are you, crazy? You're not going to do this anymore." But I volunteered then for a period of about 2 to 3 years at one of the local clothing banks in the city, where I worked as its volunteer director for a period of a couple of years. And then someone from my church asked if I wanted to go on a mission trip, a medical mission trip to Honduras in July. And I, without thinking, said, no, I'm not going to go on a mission trip because A, I don't have any medical background, and B, I don't think going to the equator in July is such a great idea. So, as it turned out, my son had gone through the Spanish immersion program at Manor Township, where they basically teach the kids in Spanish from kindergarten to 7th grade. And I thought, well, this would be a great time for me to spend some time with my son. So we went. And I was struck by the abject poverty in that Honduras and that developing country. And so I developed a nonprofit organization that still provides humanitarian aid to about 3 counties in that area. Well, during that period of time, when I was not had more spare time, I decided I was going to get involved in local politics, and it was mostly school board issues. I was concerned about the cost of schools and the cost of property tax, and so I got involved in some of the local races, and I wound up being the treasurer of Manor Township, which was just a glorified name for tax collector. I spent 2 years as the tax collector, and then my predecessor, John Baer, who held that position, decided he was going to go back into private practice, and so I ran for the representative to the Pennsylvania House of Representatives and won. So I'm in my 6th term representing the 97th district. Our terms are 2 years, and so it's a little over 10 years that I've been representing the 97th district. Well, the 97th district has changed dramatically. And I thought I'd give you a little background on that change and why, I, who represented the 97th district when it was consisted of Manor Township and Warwick, which was that same general territory for over 100 years. And now you can see that my district has changed dramatically. So how does this happen? Well, every 10 years we go through in the state of Pennsylvania a redistricting process. In the House there are 203 districts, and each one is approximately 75,000 people. So with 65 or 75,000 people, that changes. In my district, Manor Township and Warwick, it grew. And in fact, most of central Pennsylvania grew in population. And population was lost out in areas like the western part of Pennsylvania and some of the northern areas of Pennsylvania. So the process is to make sure that everybody has about the same number of constituents. So how do they go about determining these new districts? There is a 5-member committee that drives the process. And the 5-member committee is made up of a Republican leader in the House and a Democrat leader in the House, a Republican leader in the Senate, and a Democrat leader in the Senate. So far, so good.
Who represents the third parties?
Pardon me?
Who represents the third parties?
No one.
Oh, wait, sorry.
Yes.
You guys hate us.
Okay, so basically, and this gentleman's from York, by the way. He was very helpful. He helped us set up our system here. But at any rate, many times those 4 people can agree on the 5th person on the committee. But for the last couple of redistricting processes, in other words, the last 10 or 20 years, that's not been the case. So does anybody want to take a guess who chooses the 5th person when the 2 parties can choose?
The governor.
Close, but it's actually the majority party. No, it's the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania chose the 5th person, and the 5th person was the Chancellor of Pitt. So that was the driving force behind this change. Yes?
Why don't they take an independent?
Well, that's a good question, and there's been a lot of discussion about how we should do a redistricting process, but to this point, we kept it this way. So, there's groups that get together to try to coach this, but at this point, this is how they do it. So since central Pennsylvania had grown to such a degree, they were going to take one voting district, or one district, not voting district, but one house district, and move it from out west to central Pennsylvania, and they decided to move it to Lancaster County. And what they decided to do was take the city, Lancaster City, and split it. Everything north of King Street was going to be the old 96th district, which was represented by Mike Sterling, is still represented by Mike Sterling. And everything below the King Street was going to be represented by was going to be represented, and the person that was elected was Izzy. In order for them to do that, in order for them to accommodate that plan, they had to include at least half of my old district, or half of the 97th district, which was Manor Township. So Manor Township is now in Mike Sterling's territory. So what were they going to do with the 97th district that I represent? Well, as you can see that little portion of Manor Township? That's kind of 4 voting districts around my house. And then they gave me East Lampeter, or gave the 97th district, East Lampeter, West Lampeter, Peckway, Conestoga, and the southern part of Manor Township. So that is how I wound up here as a representative of the 97th district and representing you because of this change. So, because my district is a lot different than what it was, I felt as though I needed to get out and do these town halls, but also get a sense of some of the issues that are facing Pennsylvania and how that might differ from the old district and the new district. And so I took some questions that I had asked in a previous survey through the old 97th district and kind of compare it to this new 97th district. So several years ago, there were proposals that were just talked about to have state funds, use state funds to perform abortions in Pennsylvania. So I took that question and asked people in the new district. 78% of the people did not want that, and 22% did want that. That was a slight change from the old district. My old district was there were more yes votes, not more than no votes, but more yes votes than this new district. Do you support a law requiring voters to show identification before voting? Again, 82% of the people in this district said yes, but 18% said no. I might add just right now that when I sent that survey out in a newsletter, and in the newsletter we had about 550 people respond, and they didn't just respond with the answer yes or no. At least half or more than half had comments. So yes.
To whom did it go?
It went to every constituent that gets a newsletter in my new district.
Every constituent gets a newsletter. Who gets a newsletter? Every eligible
Every
voter?
house, yeah, every house.
Every house.
Gets a newsletter. The next question, do you support replacing property taxes with an expanded sales and an increase in the personal income tax? That answer is very difficult, but it needs a little more explanation than just that question. But to get an idea, 66% of the people said, yeah, we would consider changing from a property tax or property tax and move to a sales and income tax. That's been very difficult for the General Assembly to accomplish, and they've been trying to do this for the last probably 40 years. And there are reasons for that, but again, with that question, it was very close to the same here as there. Yes?
It's hard to draw conclusions for that because once taxes regress, the other taxes progress. So how were the people making the decision?
Well, again, we've been trying for 40 years to figure this out. It's not been figured out to this point. And again, I use that as a general question just to try to compare how my old district felt and how my new district felt.
So when you say property taxes,
Or just shout it out.
Basically school taxes, school and municipal taxes, but school taxes basically.
school taxes is the one that hurts the seniors.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, I firmly believe that
Right.
when you turn 65, you pay your dues all your life. It should be, I'll pay some, it should be frozen at 65.
We can get into those questions afterwards, because we can spend all night talking about property taxes. And one more, and then I'm going to keep going. Go ahead.
So I'm just curious, you said over 500 people responded.
Right.
Do you know what percentage that is of total eligible voters in your?
I would say there's probably, now, I don't know what the total percentage is with voters, and I know what you're getting at.
Right.
But the simple fact of the matter is, this is a new district, and so I had to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And that's where I started.
Yeah. I was just curious of like, is this 1%, 10%?
Some kind of a scientifically correct poll? No, it's not. But again, I had to start somewhere by doing these and asking questions. So we can get into property taxes a little bit later, and I can explain why we have such difficulty. This next one, do you think government regulations should be approved by the elected legislature? Basically, what's been happening is the DEP and the governor have kind of controlled a lot of regulations, particularly environmental regulations, through the DEP, and many regulations never get voted on by the General Assembly. And so, you know, a lot of people, even in my old district, felt that we should have more, you should have more say in what regulations are generated, because they do affect everyone. So you can see that in that question, 77% of the people said, yeah, we should have more control over what regulations are imposed. The last question was a question that surfaced about 5 or 6 years ago about union dues, particularly from public service employees, and how they're automatically taken out of the public service employees' paychecks. And it has a lot to do with how those union dues are used. But that question, 66% of the people that sent a response back said that union, as long as the union member gave written authorization to have that money taken out of their check, that was okay. The last question it wasn't a question, but it's something that I wanted to point out, and that is this district, the new 97th district, is dramatically different than my old district when it comes to Second Amendment issues. People here don't want any changes to a lot of governments, and that's just the way it is. We heard it over and over on the telephone, and so that is much different than my old district. So as your representative, I obviously will respect that. So one of the biggest issues that we face every year is the budget. And I just did this briefly to get you to think about this year's budget. So it's a simple calculation from somebody's home budget. If a person's making $50,000 and they've got living expenses of $30,000, and they've got a mortgage payment of $10,000, and then they have other discretionary spending of $10,000, they use up the $50,000. And let's say they have $20,000 in savings, so they got some backup. Yet you have another scenario of the same individual making $50,000, and he has the same living expenses, the same debt repayment, but he spends more than $10,000 on discretionary things. He spends $14,000 instead of $10,000. He's spending $4,000 more. So his savings, he has to dip into his savings in order to sort of meet his expenses. So if he does that for 5 years, he's got no more savings. That's an example of the kind of issues we face at the state level, but it's a very simple illustration. And I thought I'd start with that so you kind of get that in your mind. So, the proposed budget, every year, the governor, in the early part of February, proposes a budget. After that, for about 4 to 6 weeks, the legislature and the governor's office and all of the departments go through budget hearings where they talk about the proposed budget. So in this year's proposed budget, the total proposed budget is $45.84 billion. That's not the total amount that is spent in Pennsylvania, but it's the total amount spent with discretionary income. And that income is that we'll talk about a little bit later, is what we get from taxes. But in all of the budgets, the relationship of what this money is spent on is pretty close to the same. That big blue pie to the top right is education, pre-K through 12th grade. So his proposal is that we'll spend almost $16 billion, or about 35% of our budget, on pre-K through 12. The largest, the green pie shape, is the human services budget. Medicaid is something that everybody can identify with. There's a lot of different things in that human services budget, but that is the largest amount that we spend at the state level, and it's the fastest growing part of the budget. There's a lot of different reasons for that. One contributing factor was the Affordable Care Act, where in order for us to receive federal funds, we had to spend more, and then the federal government took a lot of those funds away from us. But that'll give you a good idea. And then higher education is about 4.3% of the budget, and you can see corrections is a large part of the budget. Debt service is not that large, and then everything else, meaning the agricultural budget, the state police, and the executive offices, are all lumped into that light blue area. The next slide just shows you a comparison of what we spent last year. We spent $42.8 million last more than what we did last year. I think it's about 6% more than what we spent last year. The next slide is about the revenues, or the projected revenues that we get. So, the projected expenditures, if you remember from the slide before, is over $45 billion. But we're not projecting $45 billion through our projected income. And that's where the issue is. But to give you an idea where we generate this revenue, we get 40% of our revenue, or $18 billion, from the personal income tax. We get 32% of our income from the sales tax. And that green section there is corporate tax. And we've been trying to reduce the corporate net income tax because a lot of people feel as though we are not attracting businesses in Pennsylvania because we're, I think, the second or third largest state when it comes to the percentage of corporate net income tax we charge. So in the governor's proposed budget, he has, and we've already reduced it slightly in the last year's budget, but we're going to try to continue to notch that down. And then you can see the other areas and what exactly, where we get some of the other. But like I said, that is the money that we have some discretion over. The legislature can decide for you, how to spend that money. Where is the pie chart that shows the total? There, right there. That is actually the Pennsylvania budget. It's $117.6 billion. So what's the difference? Well, the difference is that purple area. The federal government gives us $45.3 billion. But they give it to us with strings attached. The other part of that budget is some specific things like gas tax, which is used specifically for roads, or at least it's supposed to be. And so many times, and this is why our human services budget is expanding so rapidly, is that in order for us to get money for some of these services that we provide, the federal government will say, well, we'll give you this money, but you have to match it with this money. And so, that's been something that has been going on for a long time. But I thought that would be of interest so that you just knew a little bit about, what we are dealing with. Okay, so I think everybody's got a good picture of the budget. There are some things in that budget. And I highlighted some of the things in the governor's proposed budget. The Department of Human Services is the largest increase, again, in our budget, with about a $2.6 billion increase. I'm just going to note this $1.76 billion. It's attributed to the fact that when we went through COVID, the federal government paid for the states a certain amount of their human services costs. So they forgave the states for a period of time this money. And so now they're not doing that anymore. So $1.76 billion of the $2.6 billion is what we have to make up from what they've given us for a couple of years. We're increasing pre-kindergarten to 12th grade education by $900 million, or almost $1 billion, from 22-23. The proposal is to provide a tax credit for those areas where we are struggling to attract jobs: nursing, teaching, and policing. So the proposal is that we provide a police officer a $2,500 tax credit. Not a reduction of his income, but an actual tax credit. So if his tax bill, state tax bill, is $3,000, we would give him $2,500, he would get $2,500 back. That's one of the proposals that's in the budget. The budget also assumes that we will legalize recreational marijuana. Now, that's still, the jury's still out on that. I certainly would not support that, but there are some in the legislature that would. And so the governor put into that budget the idea that they would collect $27 million in taxes this year, and over 5 years it would go up to $252 million. And there are some states, we've seen what some other states have done, and other states' projections they've not been able to realize with the actual tax rate. The rent rebate program, which applies to retired, mostly retired or seniors, because property taxes is such an issue for seniors, I think, and I would agree with the governor in this particular case, that we should try to be driving more money to seniors to help them with their school property tax. So the governor's proposing the eligibility rate go from $35,000 per couple to $45,000 per couple, and raise the rebate from $650 a year to $1,000. Morning. The point, the exercise of this, how it relates to those two budgets I showed you, that during the COVID pandemic, as you recall, the federal government spent $7 trillion or more that they didn't have to try to eliminate, the struggles of the COVID epidemic. We can agree or disagree on that issue, but that's what happened. So when they did that, they gave not only taxpayers money, everybody remembers the $2,000 checks, they also gave states money. Over the last couple of years, we have, as a state, been able to put $5 billion of that money into a rainy day fund for when we may need it in the future. But we actually have more than $5 billion. And as you can see on this last slide, we actually have, and it's hard to see. I kind of made it intentionally hard to see because it's hard for legislators to catch on to this sometimes too. But in addition to the $5 billion, we have $7.8 billion, a surplus, right? And so the proposed budget will take that reserve and use part of it to balance the budget. Remember, go back to the slide, we got $43 billion in revenue and $45.5 billion in expenses. This is going to be used in this proposed budget so that the following year we would have $5.6 billion in reserve, the following year $3 billion in reserve, and the following year, we're almost done. And the reason I'm making that illustration is that, when that money is gone, where do you think revenue is going to come from to run the state?
The tax cattle.
Exactly. So all these things, we spend 4 to 5 months, negotiating a final budget. And the reality is that we have a House that the Democrat Party has a 1 vote advantage. It's now 101 to 100. We have a Senate that has, I think, a 5-member advantage. So in order to pass any budget, we need the House to agree, we need the Senate to agree, and we need the governor to agree. Now, some of these, it's been suggested that since the governor makes his proposal, and all budget bills originate from the House of Representatives, there's been some suggestion that the House Democrats will just pass the budget that the governor proposed, because they have 101 votes and they could do that. But what we're hearing, or what I'm hearing kind of as background noise, is that they're struggling with that because some of their members want to spend more. So, we will see in the upcoming months, in the upcoming weeks, exactly what transpires out of the House. It'll then go over to the Senate, and I think everyone here is represented by Senator Martin. And Senator Martin is the Appropriations Chair in the Senate, and so we are very lucky, not only as a county, but this district in particular, because we have Scott as the Appropriations Chair, and he will certainly be fighting for the type of values that the majority of the people have here in this district. So I think with that, I'll open it up. I'll open it up for questions. Yes.
Could you go back 8 clips to where you showed that $50,000 income?
Yeah.
See that? And my wife and I have a gross income of $44,000.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's missing there
Right.
$9,000 from medical care.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I just used that as an example. I was not trying to be.
Well, I'm just saying,
but yeah.
if you're going to use that,
Right.
yeah, between Medicare and supplemental insurance, prescription plan, dental plan, and $9,000, so $9,000, and $9,000 should be up there.
Yeah, noted. Yes.
What are the prospects we'll get a budget done on time this year?
I think if the House is able to send over the governor's budget as it's proposed, we may be able to get the budget, on time. If they don't, then I'm not so sure.
Think there'll be any bipartisan support, or is it going to be strictly party line?
You mean in the House?
House and Senate?
Well, on the final product, there's always bipartisan support. But in other words, on the final proposal, on the original proposal, I suspect that the House will be divided on party. Yes.
How is the tax rebate done? Is it done by the federal federal income tax that you put in? Is that what it's figured off of for the tax rebate?
I think it's no, not. You mean what your
For
net?
for that $1,000?
Oh yeah. Mike, what is it?
Basically, the amount, the income level, right now, the representative said it's $35,000, so as long as your income, if you're a homeowner, is under 35, if you're a renter, it's under 18, so that's what he was saying.
But I mean, but what you report on your federal income.
Yeah, that's what it's
And then I think they only use half of the Social Security.
Yeah. Okay.
The Pennsylvania is very lucky in that all of our lottery proceeds go to seniors, and seniors that are struggling income wise can get a lot of prescriptions very, very inexpensive. So those are something that people should really look into, because one of the committee that I'm chair of is aging. I guess I'm there because I am aging. But the other thing is, it's attractive. One of the problems we have as a state, in my opinion, particularly as it applies to property taxes, that we have a declining population of young people and an increased population of retired people. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that Pennsylvania does not tax pensions. And, we live in a district, I think it's Manor Township. Well, Willow Valley is not Manor Township, but it doesn't matter. But if in Willow Valley, we get a lot of people from Delaware, New Jersey, a New York state. Well, in New York, their top marginal tax rate, or income tax rate, is 7%, right? So if you get a retired executive who has a pension of $150,000, and he's living in Delaware, his state tax might be $10,000. He moves here and what does he pay? Nothing. So, you know, from one standpoint, that's good because it helps the economy. It provides more service jobs, but that's not really helping us when it comes to solving this problem of the high property tax. Yes.
You're right about Delaware, but they do exempt the first 12,500
Okay.
on the tax.
You mean the 12,500 for?
Yeah, that's exempt. And then anything on top of
Yeah.
that. Yes.
Yeah, no,
It's a graduated
right.
tax. One of my concerns is Pennsylvania is such a big state, but we lose a lot of money, I think, in this state. Well, I shouldn't say that we lose it, we just don't get it. And I'm going back to Delaware, and I think you know this, most of the big businesses in this country today are incorporated in the state of Delaware.
Mm-hmm.
How can we get some of that money? How can we get some of them to incorporate in Pennsylvania?
Well, by lowering the corporate net income tax. And in the governor's proposal, he does propose to lower that over a period of 6 or 7 years. It's a struggle because during budget time, you know, we're always looking for money. And so to give up part of that corporate net income tax is tough to do. But that's one way we can do it.
Have they ever looked into trying to get more businesses incorporated in the state?
Yeah, but again, if you're in a state where they don't charge a corporate net income tax, that's where people are going to want to go. You know what I'm saying? So,
I guess what I'm saying is too, if you charge these companies a low tax base, they will come into your state and they bring a lot of money in with it.
exactly.
And we're losing a lot of that money.
Yeah, and that's what the governor's trying to do by reducing our corporate net income tax. So, you know, there's an attempt being made there, because I think there was only one state or two states that had higher corporate net income taxes than us, and I think Alaska is one of them. But that, you know, it's a good point, and that's what they're trying to do. Yes.
It amazes me that tax revenue for recreational marijuana, when Pennsylvania does not have legalized recreational marijuana, is in the budget as revenue. Number one, I shouldn't assume. Number one question is, has that ever happened before? Number two question, what is the status of legalizing recreational marijuana in the state of Pennsylvania?
Well, I think the governor is a proponent, and I think that it will get support from most of the Democrats, and it may get support from some Republicans, and they may have enough support to have that passed. Based on my conversations, even in my old district, I would not be supporting that unless you all tell me tonight that you think I should be supporting that, for several reasons. A, until they can quantify what level of THC in your system makes you impaired, then we're in the same situation we were with alcohol, where it took us 30 years and millions of deaths, automobile deaths, until we can quantify, you know, what's businesses don't want this, because they're struggling now with the medical marijuana, because a guy is operating a heavy piece of machinery, and he comes to work and he's high, and they're, you know, concerned about his safety and the safety around them. So, you know, besides the fact that I'm not sure this is the best thing to do for society in general, I really could not support this until we can quantify how much THC is, you know, it causes impairment. So, to answer your question, that same thing was done with medical marijuana. It's been done in other budgets. So, you know, and the budget again is just, it's like a
This
moving
is
target.
recreational marijuana.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
But before medical marijuana was legal,
Okay.
they did the kind of the jump.
Kind of smoking mirrors.
Yeah.
Is there a plan B if it doesn't become legal?
All of these things are just negotiated in the package over 2 months. $27 million in a $45 billion budget, you know, that can be replaced. Yes.
How is the heavy machinery different than if you had a prescription for Percocet or some other prescription
Right.
medicine?
Well, you know, I guess you have to have a prescription. That's one thing.
But you're also,
Yeah.
the businesses say you cannot operate heavy machinery, you know, if you're on a prescription medicine, so I don't see how that's a problem if you add marijuana to the list. Because it's already there, they from Percocet or some other painkiller.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's, I certainly understand where you're coming from. I just spent the morning with the Associated Builders and Contractors, and that was one of the issues they brought up. So, and certainly operating an automobile without having those conditions is an issue, I think.
And the other states haven't, you said that wasn't quantifiable yet, but the other states have had it for a
Right,
while now.
and you know, Colorado has struggled with traffic issues.
Yeah, the accident rate went up.
Yeah.
A lot of people I know.
Anybody else have any questions?
Just of curiosity, at what level is it an inheritance tax? I know the federal level, I don't know the state level.
When you pass to an heir, it is 4.5%. I don't think there's an exemption. But if there is, it's very, very low. You don't pass to an heir, it's 6.5%.
But there's no ceiling or...
No. And I think what you'll find is, high net worth individuals will make their residence, which is 6 months and a day in Florida, where there is no inheritance tax.
We're only one of, maybe 12 or 13 states that have an inheritance tax.
One of how many? How many
12 or 13.
that have an inheritance tax?
We're only one of 12 of 13 states that have an inheritance.
I didn't know that.
And I think if it's not blood, Pennsylvania's 15%.
Well, I thought it was 6.5%, but we'll certainly, you know.
Well, I read into that, that's right.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Well,
Which is awful.
Pennsylvania's not a good state to die in. Yes.
So if we reduce the green piece of the pie even more, should we presume that the blue piece and the red piece that affect individuals and families will have to get larger?
You know, you could assume that. I think the argument that the other side of that argument is that we will attract more businesses, and if we attract more businesses, we'll have more employees paying more personal income tax and more sales tax. The interesting thing is, during the pandemic, part of this, I talked about the surplus. During the pandemic, when everybody was receiving the $2,000 checks, well, not everybody, but a lot of people were receiving the $2,000 checks, they went out and spent more money, and we had an increase in sales tax receipts, and that attributed to part of that surplus. Yes.
One of the problems with reducing corporate taxes is a race to the bottom among states, which is the law of diminishing return. If everybody keeps lowering taxes to corporations, revenue goes down for everybody, and states lose an advantage because everybody's racing to the bottom.
Good point.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Not to change the subject, I'm going to the education field. Is the majority of the money that's budgeted for education in Pennsylvania going to teacher pensions?
I don't think the majority. sorry that it's going to teacher pensions.
Hmm?
I mean, compensation for teachers is a large percentage of that expense. But, you know, the pensions are, the teachers pay into the pension, so they pay 6.5%. It just happens that we have a defined benefit plan in Pennsylvania, which is very expensive, and we've struggled to keep up with the payments on these pensions. Yes.
Just to point this graph, one thing that would make it very useful is if you put another figure underneath there, if it's plus or minus from last year's, like plus or minus 1% from last year's budget.
And what is we skipped over that slide. There's last year.
Right, but I mean, you can't.
Yeah, good idea.
You can't
I'll do
compare
that.
it.
Yeah, you're right. I'll do it. That's a good suggestion.
We're good. We're not that good.
Well, I certainly appreciate everybody coming out, and I'll stick around here for any questions that you may have. But again, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Another